Good afternoon. Attention, please. Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Monroe Carmen. I'm president of the club and editor-at-large at Bloomberg Business News. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience, as well as those of you watching this program on C-SPAN or listening to it on National Public Radio or the Global Internet Computer Network. Before introducing our head table, I'd like to remind our members of some upcoming speakers. On Monday, June 26th, former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher will address a press club audience. Then on Wednesday, July 5th, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich, will be here. And on Wednesday, July 12th, author and journalist Hedrick Smith will be on hand to help give out our annual Press Club Journalism Awards. Transcripts and audio and video tapes of Press Club luncheons are available by calling 1-800-NPC-2334. That's the way to do it in television, right? 1-800-NPC-2334. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards provided at your table. Send them up and I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table and ask them to stand briefly when their names are mentioned. From your right, Don West, editor, Broadcasting and Cable Magazine. Steve Guyman, Warren Publishing. Tim Russett, Washington Bureau Chief, NBC News. Jack Reynolds Communication. Andrew Barrett, Commissioner, Federal Communications Commission. Skipping over our speaker, Reggie Stewart, Assistant News Editor, Night Reader Newspapers, and member of the National Press Club Speakers Committee who arranged today's luncheons. Thank you, Reggie. Betty Cole Duckert, Executive Producer, Meet the Press. Phil Trulock, Executive Vice President, Heritage Foundation. Leland Schwartz, Publisher States News Service. Mark Gunther, Detroit Free Press. And Paul Farhi of the Washington Post. Just a few short years ago, the colorful NBC Peacock was looking discouragingly pale. The nation's first television network was on such a downhill slide that there were almost daily rumors of its demise or its imminent sale to one of a dozen prospective suitors. Then suddenly, as only a Hollywood or New York scriptwriter can do it, NBC began to show signs of life again. First came the downsizing of the company by its purchaser in 1986, the General Electric Corporation. Then came a diversification into cable television, including CNBC and America's Talking, and part interest in Court TV, American Movie Classics, and 17 other offerings. Next came a steady diversification abroad, culminating in this week's launching of CNBC Asia, based in Hong Kong. Along the way, the network reinvigorated its programming with fresh new offerings such as The Cosby Show, Cheers, Seinfeld, ER, Friends, and Dateline. NBC earned $400 million in profits for GE last year, and analysts are predicting the network will give leader ABC a run for its ratings in the fall. The man leading the revitalization of the Peacock network is 52-year-old Robert Wright. He came to NBC from General Electric Financial Services, a background that left no doubt as to his credentials as a bean counter. Yes. Sorry about that. Yes, he did some slashing and burning. But he also has been willing to make substantial investments in risky ventures, most of which have succeeded. It's not hyperbole to say Mr. Wright has set the stage for the Peacock to march proudly into the next century. The job has not been easy. When Mr. Wright started 8 years ago, he had a full head of hair. But the fruits of his labors are now paying off in all sorts of accolades. Within the past year, he has been honored by his college, his high school, and his elementary school. What happened to the nursery school? Mr.
Downside.
I see. Mr. Wright and his wife, Suzanne, have received other gratifications over the past month. One of their daughters graduated from high school. Another completed her studies at Columbia University Graduate School, and their son graduated from Holy Cross. Today, we'll hear about the challenges facing the television industry from someone who knows what he's talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, the president of the National Broadcasting Company, Mr. Robert Wright.
Thank you, Bud. I have to set the record straight on one little thing. My son would probably be offended if he sees that, because he didn't go to Holy Cross. I did. I would have loved it if he did, but he didn't. He actually graduated from Colgate, and we don't hold that against him at Holy Cross. I think I should sit down after that wonderful introduction and just let the rest of this go and go right to questions. But unfortunately, that's not part of the agenda. I also wish, and since I just heard Betty was explaining to me that John Major has essentially announced that he's stepping down as head of the government at some point, that you have Margaret Thatcher here next week. I think those tickets are going to be hard to come by. That's
Sold out already.
Sold out already. Based on what she said before, when he was head of the government, my guess is this is going to be quite an exciting event. Well, let me get to some words that you kindly are going to give me the time to present, and I hope this is useful, and it certainly expresses an opinion that we at NBC have about some things that are very important to us. I guess I could open by saying what you already know. This is a time of great change. Technology is driving an awful lot of it, deregulation. But in reality, it's technology that's driving it. And unfortunately, I think as a country, we've always been quick to accept the fact that technology is a driver, and you can only hold it back so long. And to do so, to hold it back indefinitely, is to your own disadvantage. We certainly support that. Congress is also in the midst of the most sweeping revolution of television, of technology, and of communications in 50 years, and we certainly don't lose sight of that, and we've tried to participate. I have some challenges I want to talk about, but I also want to say very emphatically that what NBC supports, that we philosophically and economically and emotionally support high-definition television, digital broadcasting, free, universal, accessible broadcast television, efficient use of the spectrum, and when it makes sense, spectrum auctions. I applaud the sweep of regulatory changes that Congress is considering. But even as we embrace them, we must nurture and we must remember that even allowing competitors in, the government should be careful not to create either a business or regulatory environment that places free, universal, available broadcast television at a competitive disadvantage. I'd like to talk about two particular threats that are currently in front of Congress that relate to that. We've acted on our commitments to change, and I think Bud did an adequate job of mentioning the things that we've done, so I don't want you to think that our focus today indicates that we have only an agenda to serve in broadcast television. I think these comments become more credible because we have invested in so many other forms of communication, in cable and global and online services. So I think I can make these statements without saying that we're just protecting our only focus in life. We own and operate, as he said, 19 19 different cable services, or 21, some of which we own, some of which we own substantial portions of. We did start 2 days ago a live 24-hour service out of Hong Kong, or based out of Hong Kong, covering Asia, CNBC Asia, and that's made up of 12.5 hours of live, daily produced material on the Far East. We run on a live basis about 8 hours of programming coming out of CNBC in the United States, and the remaining between 2 and 3 hours a day out of Europe business news. So it's a live 24 hours produced network. And we've got a similar issue in Europe, only in Europe we started out with more of a general service, and we'll also do a business service. So we've tried to do an awful lot to take advantage of technology, deregulation, and a growing appetite for video services around the world. We've also entered new media, and we have many things that involve the digital age: NBC Desktop, digital publishing, and data network. So we really are committed to be at the front of the communications parade and not at the back end. But as we push forward in those new endeavors, we don't want to lose sight of the extraordinary accomplishment and achievement that today's broadcast stations across the country represent. From the past 50 years, the United States has built the best broadcasting system in the world. It delivers free, local, and national programming to virtually every home in America. On a local level, stations provide regularly scheduled local news, weather, sports, and intense news coverage for local emergencies. On a national level, NBC provides many of the most watched and best produced news, entertainment, and sports programs. And at times of national emergency, such as the Oklahoma City bombing, we provided instant, continuous news coverage for an entire nation. And all of that is available for free. Anyone who follows the broadcast industry knows that it is an industry of cycles. Right now, broadcast television and NBC are both having banner years. And even more important, the fundamentals of the business appear to be strong as well. Well, that's a change from a number of years ago. So what happened? Well, for one, advertisers have rediscovered broadcasting as the superb way to reach a broad national audience. And even more, they complement and they take advantage, and as others aim at our audience, competitors, broadcasters remain the very best way to build brand awareness, brand loyalty, and to introduce new products. Broadcasters command sizable audiences, and our unique blend of news, weather, sports, and localization will attract, in my opinion, bigger audience than pay services for some time to come, if broadcasting gets a fair shake from Washington. Well, let's try and describe some elements of that fair shake. Let's take a look at the spectrum issue. And before everybody's eyes glaze over, I assure you that spectrum decisions really do and will have a tremendous impact and effect on consumers when they turn on their sets in the future, and even the type of television set that they're going to be watching. First of all, spectrum is air. And without for the moment joining the debate on the virtues and vices of the many FCC regulations, I trust everyone will agree that the FCC has appropriately served as a spectrum traffic policeman, ensuring that one use, for instance, radio or cellular communications, does not interfere with other uses, such as television, and that different stations in a market or adjacent markets do not interfere with each other, and that every market and every home in the country has an opportunity to receive free television. Original broadcasters were granted licenses to use spectrum in return for investing and creating a privately funded national communication service for every community. They also had to embrace certain public interest obligations defined by statute. In television's infancy, huge economic and technical risks were taken, and over time, billions of dollars have been invested creating station and network businesses or purchasing businesses others had created. Today's broadcasters have paid for their air rights. They didn't pay the government, but they did pay in the open market for spectrum use. They took the risks and they ate the losses in the early years to create this excellent free television system. To understand this, let's look for a moment to the western expansion of this country. A series of homestead acts were passed that gave individuals federal land for free if they performed the public service of settling the land. Their land has been sold many times over. It would be ludicrous to suggest today that to help fix the federal budget deficit, the current owner should turn over that land to the government for auction. Equally absurd, some are suggesting that today's broadcasters now be forced to buy something they've already paid for. Broadcasters have taken years and years to establish their stations, programming, and their values. Today's broadcasting system works spectacularly well for the American people. It should not fall victim, illogically and unfairly, to the national need to balance the federal budget. The proposal that is actually part of the telecom reform bill that just passed in the Senate would throw broadcasters off the spectrum they use for local news gathering, making the equipment they currently use obsolete and seriously hurting their ability to provide on-the-spot coverage of local news events. The vacated spectrum would be auctioned off to reduce the deficit, but at what cost to the broadcasting system? The equipment has not even been invented to function in the newly assigned higher spectrum bands, nor does the bill compensate broadcasters for the cost of that relocation. Some are even suggesting that television broadcasters alone should be singled out in paying for spectrum use. Let me make an analogy of a policeman directing traffic at a major intersection. His job is to make sure cars don't run into each other, just as the FCC's job has been to ensure that users of the airwaves do not interfere with each other's signals. But imagine a local government official looking for a way to raise revenue arrives at the intersection. While waiting there, he sees a red car goes by, and he said, "Let's tax all red cars using this intersection." Why just the red cars? Well, they're the most visible cars. In addition, he decides to tax red cars not just to pay for the police officer, but also to use the tax to underwrite whole other areas of municipal services. Those proposing to tax only broadcaster spectrum may be under the mistaken view that other video and communication services, such as telephone, cable, cellular, DBS, and others, do not use the spectrum. But they do just like broadcasters do. Even if the last link in the journey of a video program or a voice or data communication to the home is over a telephone or a cable wire, at some point it more than likely traveled via spectrum. Let me give you some facts which I hope will put this in perspective. The cable industry is licensed to use 5 times more frequencies than the television broadcasting industry. The 2 largest providers of long-distance telephone service are licensed to use 3 times the number of frequencies than the entire broadcast television industry. 86% of total spectrum is controlled solely by the federal government. The federal government shares control with the private sector for another 9%. In terms of the spectrum below 30,000 megahertz, which given today's technology is the most usable, the federal government has exclusive use of 37% of the frequencies and shares use in another 31%. In contrast, broadcasters use a relatively small portion of the spectrum, especially given the scope of the public that they serve. VHF stations use only 0.02 of 1% of total available spectrum. UHF stations use another 0.11 of 1% of the spectrum. Together, broadcast television accounts for less than 0.2 of 1% of all available spectrum to transmit TV signals to the home. At that intersection, just 2 of every 1,000 cars would be red. If more spectrum is needed for emerging technologies or to auction off for revenue, we urgently suggest that we look at the government-controlled spectrum. A recent study by the Progress and Freedom Foundation reported that, quote, large portions of the spectrum go underutilized or vastly underutilized, and many of the wasted bands are under the control of the federal government, unquote. A recent Department of Commerce report on spectrum utilization identified 3 frequency bands currently used by the federal government as prime targets for relocation and to commercial use and potential auction. The '93 Budget Act commenced the process of liberating spectrum from government control to be made available for commercial uses. Acceleration and significant expansion of that effort should be a cornerstone of efforts to identify additional spectrum for new uses and to raise revenues. Government bureaucrats have built entire careers on hoarding spectrum. That should cease. The government should be willing to reduce its dependency on spectrum, just as private sector users have done so over the years. The government's motherlode of available spectrum should be carefully mined before the Congress trains its sight on the spectrum utilized by broadcasters to provide the public with free over-the-air service. But if spectrum use is to be taxed, then all users should be taxed as well. Radio, telephone, cable, cellular, DBS, CBs, X-ray machines, autofocusing cameras, and garage door openers, all of which use the available spectrum under license. But it gets more interesting. I find even more puzzling what some in Washington want to do concerning the nation's 200 million television sets. First, some background on high-definition television, or digital television, which in the future will provide a dramatically improved television service of motion picture quality. About 8 years ago, at the specific direction of Congress and the FCC, brought together broadcasters, manufacturers of television sets, government groups, and other interested parties to develop a grand design for a smooth transition to new advanced television. They looked at consumer issues, policy issues, economic concerns, and technological obstacles. It was not done casually. There were tens of thousands of hours of research, conferences, testimony, public hearings. It has been an ongoing process over 8 years, which has led to a plan for a smooth and orderly transition. We estimate that in response to this congressional and FCC directive, more than $500 million has been spent by U.S. industry to develop digital television. From the very beginning, it was understood by everyone, FCC, broadcasters, and the Congress, that broadcasters' existing spectrum was technically unable to transmit high-definition television, and that a second channel in different frequencies was needed to transition from the old service to the new service. As a result, all broadcast stations will be temporarily loaned a transitional channel to broadcast their programming in digital format. It will be necessary to have 2 broadcast channels for a period of time so that programs can be broadcast both in digital format for those viewers who choose to invest in new digital televisions, as well as the current analog format for the 200 million sets that are currently in use in our homes today, and that will not be able to process the new digital signal. In Washington, for example, WRC would continue to broadcast on Channel 4, but for those consumers who bought the digital sets, WRC would have to broadcast on a second channel, Channel 34, to send that signal to their homes. Once the transition is completed, all broadcasts will be transmitted digitally, and the spectrum that broadcasters currently use will be returned to the government. The newly usable spectrum can then be auctioned by the government for new uses, raising new revenues. The consensus estimates by those who have studied this is that a sensible transition will take at least 15 years. As a point of reference, 10 years after color television was introduced, only 20% of the country had opted to buy a color set. As a result of budget needs today, some have floated the idea of ignoring all the planning to date and accelerating the transition so that the analog spectrum can be auctioned off early. They want to auction off the current spectrum in 7 years and eliminate the current signal 3 years after that. Now, don't get me wrong, NBC continues to lead the industry in the introduction of new technology, just as we did with the introduction of television, color television, stereo broadcast. We are committed to digital high-definition television. But think for a moment about how long this process should reasonably take to avoid rendering tens of millions of television sets useless. The television networks between us must invest more than $1 billion to produce and transmit television programs in digital high-definition form. The 1,500 local stations must invest $12 billion to produce and transmit high-definition television, and consumers must buy new sets. When they become available, high-definition television sets are estimated to cost, in today's dollars, $2,500 apiece. Converter boxes for existing sets, we estimate, will be priced around $500. To give a sense of the size of investment required of the American public at today's prices, to put a converter box on every set in America would cost $100 billion. Well, this may be an economic windfall for pay television services and converter box manufacturers all over the world. The cost would fall squarely on the backs of American consumers. Since the FCC has not yet set the standards for all of this equipment, any assumption that the transition will realistically be accomplished by 2005 is implausible. The most successful consumer electronic appliance to hit the market, the VCR, had only a 43% penetration after 10 years. Let me make it clear that every single American television in America today, all 200 million, will be obsolete the day that the analog signal is cut off. So the issue isn't whether it's going to happen, the issue is when it will happen. And how long do people get notice, and how long can they use what they currently have? You don't buy a major appliance, whether it be a toaster, a television, a dishwasher, thinking that the government might pass a law requiring you or making it happen that you would have to throw the appliance in the junk heap. This is what will happen if the transition to digital broadcasting is unreasonably accelerated without basing the transition on what the U.S. consumer actually chooses to do. This is essentially a $100 billion tax. And whether it fits the exact definition of a tax or not, the effect is the same, $100 billion plus tax on consumers. We are totally committed to high-definition television. It only makes sense for us. We don't want to force viewers to choose an array of options offered by pay service providers because the quality of our picture is not the best it can be. We will have to offer the best picture. We understand that. That's the nature of our business. I understand the need for additional government revenues as well, and I strongly support a balanced budget, and everyone has to be prepared to do their share. But in looking for new revenues, we must not throw out good public policy, years of planning, and most of all, common sense. In addition to appropriate spectrum use, there's one other issue that I'd like to bring to your attention. It has to do with proprietary navigational systems to be employed by our telephone and cable competitors that make it very difficult for a viewer to find free broadcast television. Broadcasters depend on large audiences. That's what gives us the ability to finance the system. Advertisers pay the bills. Our ability to attract large audiences depends upon a consumer who wants to watch our programming, and he has to be able to find it. Now, easy access does not guarantee us anything. Only attractive programming brings in a large audience, but attractive programming will gain us nothing if the audience can't find it, or if viewers tire before they have clicked through multiple program menus, one or more of which diverts them to a pay service or services owned by the telco or cable operator. And access is threatened. If any of you have stayed in a hotel lately, you may have caught a glimpse of what will be the future of television in your home. Virtually all the hotels have sold the rights to television in their rooms to third parties. Hotels no longer buy television sets or program them. Third parties pay for the right to put select programming in the rooms. These third parties have quickly determined which programs they can charge the most for, which will generate the most revenue and get the biggest return. So those programs or advertisements for them are the very first things you see when you turn on your television. And whether you're looking for movies, and you'll normally find a large supply of R-rated and unrated movies that are featured, wrestling, maybe videos about weight gain or weight loss, or whatever other, they're all pay services. Viewers have to work to find their local free station. As choices increase, the navigational systems of the future will have strong proprietary incentives to hide free services on a distant limb of a navigational tree and to try to steer consumers toward pay services as they travel along those branches. Navigational systems and complicated program menus threaten broadcasters' ability to remain universally available as providers of free news, sports, and entertainment. Let me assure you, there will be no other free video in the home. All of the emerging competitors, cable, telco, DBS, online computers, are exclusively pay services. The competitive survival of broadcasting should be based on the quality of our programming and services, not the creativity or craftiness of a navigational designer. Both the Senate and House telecommunications bills address the issue of fair and easy access in very different ways. It will be critical for the Congress to write the strongest possible legislative assurances that consumers have the same easy access to free over-the-air broadcasting that they have today. And may the best programming win. Think of the worst-case scenario, a future in which discriminatory spectrum fees drive viewers from free television to pay television, in which tens of millions of television sets are made obsolete overnight by government fiat, and consumers are forced to pay billions to upgrade or replace their sets, in which quality television is available only for a price, and the best universally available broadcast system in the world is dismantled and destroyed. This is certainly a future we can avoid, and I have faith that we will avoid it. It's my hope that broadcasters, working with Congress and the FCC, can offer every home in the United States the opportunity to receive a digital motion picture quality television picture free. It is also my hope that we can avoid the shoals of prejudicial navigational systems. If we're successful, even in the vastly competitive marketplace of today and the future of the next century, then free over-the-air broadcasting, universally accessible broadcasting, will survive and thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now the hard part. Is NBC still up for sale? Why? Why not? And if it is, who are you talking to most seriously?
The answer is it's not up for sale. We're doing just fine, and we like it just fine.
All right. Tim Russ is very pleased about that. Let's go on to some legislation. Critics of the telecommunications bill in Congress say that the bill would allow the TV networks to become news and entertainment monopolies, even more so, because it would free you to buy up TV, radio, and newspaper companies around the country. Indeed, Congressman Ed Markey has said that the new bill, quote, will make Citizen Kane look like an underachiever, unquote. What is the prospect out there that this is going to open the door to further consolidation of media interests?
Well, the reality is that the bills, both in the Senate and the House, open up video programming to enormously new, very large new competitors. Telco is brought in. Cable is released from some of the onerous and difficult regulations that it has. And the anticipation is that there will be many, many video services to the home in addition to the ones you currently have. And in that prospect, at the present time, the various bills provide lots of cross-ownership opportunities for all parties. I think the rationale is pretty sound. It's not one that we created, but it's basically let's do everything we can to enhance as much technological advancement, and if we see we're going to get into problems later, we'll review it. I think, quite frankly, the House bill, the proposed bill, has a review period, as a matter of fact, asking both the FCC and the Justice Department to review situations from time to time that may lead to the very issue that that question addresses. As far as broadcasters, the irony is that the owning of television stations is the only area in all of the bills that has any limitation whatsoever. There's a limitation in the Senate bill of proposed of 35% of the country, and the House as a 35 going to 50. There is no limitation in terms of cable. There is no limitation in terms of telco. There's no limitation on any other of the video competitors as to how much of the country they could serve, how many of the services they could own, etc. So I find that kind of ironic, given the fact that the one they're limiting is the one that's free. And the ones that they're not limiting are the ones that are all pay services. So I kind of think we have our priorities backwards. This is the rare example where you would think from a political standpoint, the free service is the one you would want to do everything possible to keep active and to allow the pay services to compete on the basis that people are going to pay for them, as opposed to trying to make it easier for the pay services to be successful, potentially at the expense of economic success for the free services.
The bill that just cleared the Senate would require TV manufacturers to install a, quote, choice chip, unquote, in their sets, so parents can block out shows that are violent or sexually explicit. Do you think that's a good idea? And you might as well go on to comment on sex and violence in television and Hollywood and anywhere else you want to take it on. But Senator Dole has been very popular with that.
Well, the question of sex and violence is easy. I'm for one and against the other. We, speaking for NBC, and I think I can say this broadly for broadcasters, but I'll keep it to ourselves because we have appropriate control of our own. We really have. There has never been a period in the modern era of television where we have so little material that could be deemed violent on the air. We've made enormous strides. A lot of it public pressure, a lot of it congressional pressure, granted, a lot of it FCC pressure. But also the reality is we pay a lot of attention to what viewers want and the kinds of audiences that we serve and families and homes and so forth. We have to pay a lot of attention to that. So the issue isn't really a problem for us. So I'll distance myself a little bit from that concern. As far as the general topic of the V-chip or the chips, I think that's going to be a gold mine for lawyers. I think that is just going to result in endless litigation, and I think you're going down, or they're going down a First Amendment path, which is eventually going to lead to a closed door.
So you feel that any mechanism to give viewers an option of screening out sex and violence?
No, I just said that the discussions that are underway would seem to be leading in a direction that is going to just create an awful lot of litigation. In the end, people have to make the choices that they feel comfortable with. And I think broadcasters, by and large, have eliminated the kind of material which is the focus of these discussions. And then pay services can be dealt with in a different manner. But it isn't really my issue.
All right. How about this? The Federal Communications Commission recently proposed issuing content quotas to TV stations, requiring them to air as many as 7 hours each week of children's programming. What's your reaction to that?
Well, children's programming has always been part of the broadcaster pact, both written and unwritten, in public service. So I certainly don't have a negative view of that. I think when you get to the issue of quantification and you start creating issues involving hours or specific time periods and things of that nature, I think you're going too far. I think that becomes to be content regulation, and I probably would say the same thing, that approach, if followed through in a dramatic manner, is just going to lead to a lot of litigation and a lot of concerns about freedom of expression and First Amendment rights.
This isn't exactly a friendly question. So, wasn't it hypocritical of NBC to file a foreign ownership complaint against Fox Television and then drop the complaint when Rupert Murdoch agreed to carry NBC programming in Asia?
Well, the reality of it is that we filed because we knew we couldn't do a number of the things which we saw happening in the Fox front. And we asked for a level playing field, we asked for a review of foreign ownership rules, and we asked for clarification of foreign ownership, what the status was. Between the time that we began filing our complaints, which goes back into the fall, up until February, we had achieved what we believe were substantial successes. The FCC agreed and published a rulemaking on the very issues that we sought relief on. Examination and clarification of foreign ownership rules, and examination and clarification of attribution. Now, those were the principal issues that we cited and the concerns that we had when we filed against the Savoy stations. The reality of it is that we have ongoing relationships around the world with News Corp, as we do with many suppliers of programs and distributors, and it became, in my opinion, too much of a personal issue between NBC and News Corp. Once we had achieved the objectives we set out to achieve, we thought that withdrawal from the scene and looking after our long-term relationships with each other was important, and we felt the Congress and the FCC were completely and adequately appraised and were prepared to deal with the issues.
Speaking of Fox, that network just won more than $1 billion in pre-sales for the fall season. How does Fox's success with upfront sales affect NBC's market share?
Well, obviously, any competitor that's in the same, precisely the same business as you are is going to have some impact. And so I think in the long term, we expect that it'll be tougher and more difficult to attract the same size audiences. But that's part of competition. So there's no need crying about it. That's the type of business environment that all of us exist in. I think we are fortunate. It's a very strong marketplace. And this year and last year, there has been more than enough advertising to support the needs of many of us. So we're not complaining.
Well, now the networks face competition from two new networks, right? UPN and Warner Brothers. What does that mean for the industry?
Well, it means that there are probably two companies left somewhere in the world that aren't in the network business, or that haven't yet made an announcement to get in, and we haven't quite located the names of those. It's all about the same thing. I think there are people that there are companies that feel that being in the business will enhance their ability to produce, finance, and distribute programs, and that's part of the competitive world we live in. So I wish them well.
When Ted Turner spoke here last year, he had a few choice words to say about you and NBC. Would you like to return the compliment?
That's funny. I thought the choice words were directed to Time Warner, but well, I have no particular comment on that. Ted is a successful entrepreneur who speaks his mind more often than not, and that's his style, that's his persona, and you know, we all go about life in a different way. I wish him luck. He's done very well.
As you know, there are those in Congress who want to cut back funding for public television. Some even want to zero it out. Is public television in the public interest?
I think the answer to that question is yes. I think the difficulty is that, and because I've spoken, as many broadcasters have, to many members of Congress on this subject, it's hard to keep all these things in perspective. But the money that's allocated to public television by people's standards is substantial. But by budget standards, it's hardly anything. By national budget standards, it's hardly anything. Yet I think many congressmen are concerned that there's a great disparity of wealth, as they view it, in the public television business. There are some markets that seem to be very strong. They have very strong stations. They're well endowed. Others that have very little money. And I think they feel that that's an inequitable situation, and they feel compelled to raise the issue of whether that financing should be handled differently or whatever. It gets to be very complicated. I think from our standpoint, public television serves a very valid and important purpose. We do what we can to support it. I don't believe in the end that public television will disappear. I believe that these issues will be dealt with in some form or another. I hate to think that public television has to become commercial or disappear in order to get through this, but I really don't think that will happen.
Can you give us some insight into your plans for television coverage of the 1996 elections? Will there be changes?
Well, we haven't announced. I don't think we have, Tim. We haven't announced our plans in detail, but they will be extensive. This is the heart of what we do, and we will do it as well as we can. We will have extensive coverage very early and continue, and all of our news programs will certainly carry coverage details when appropriate. We're fortunate that we have 3 hours of prime time in Dateline, which gives us a very unique opportunity to showcase issues, and certainly issues relating to the election and coverage will be part of that. We have Meet the Press with Tim. We have the Today Show, which now runs 7 days a week, and we have all of our local news hours. We have nightly news, which will highlight and be our flagship on that reporting on a daily basis. And we have overnight, our nightly news service, which is carried in most stations in blocks of 3 or 4 hours. So the will is there, the energy is there, and certainly the distribution is there. So I think you'll see us probably making the specific announcements that maybe that question is directed to soon, but it will be quite extensive.
There's several questions, and I know you touched on cable, but several questions asking for some more elaboration on NBC investing in cable channels, which one, and secondly, do you fear that cable may price itself out of the reach of many households?
Well, the cable television business is a different business from broadcasting. And fortunately, technology and investment by people in the cable television business have made it an attractive business and accessible. We focus primarily on news and information-oriented services. Those are the ones that we have developed ourselves and we own 100% of. We've also invested in many others, and many of those are sports services or other informational-based services, and some are entertainment services, like American Movie Classics and things. But we recognize the difference. Cable television is a pay service, and it derives substantial revenue on a subscriber fee basis, supplemented by advertising. That's what allows the cable services to be more focused on smaller audiences. It is the design of the system, and it allows the cable operator to generate, and the programmer to generate enough revenue with a very small audience. Whereas advertisers, it's almost impossible. You have to have the great breadth so you can bring the large advertisers, the national advertisers in to support it. The distinguishing issue is that we are involved in both businesses because they are serving and they reach people in the home. Our business is providing video in the home. That's how we describe our business. And there are different ways to deliver it. But we have to constantly distinguish between the foundations of those different kinds of services. And cable is a different foundation, generally focused at a smaller audience. And broadcasting, to be successful, has to continue to focus at very large audiences, and is going to be with no subscriber payments. And that creates the issues that we're talking about here today.
Will NBC bid for the Olympics?
Well, we certainly will pay a lot of attention. We were pleased to present Barcelona and pleased to present Seoul before that, and I think everybody will be very excited by what we do in Atlanta next summer. Every Olympics is something we look at, but I certainly couldn't go any further than that. I think there'll be a lot of competition for that.
All right, let's get down to celebrities now. In retrospect, wasn't it a big mistake for NBC to let David Letterman go to CBS?
Well, we found ourselves in the situation where we had too many riches, I suppose, and we couldn't accommodate the needs of the Tonight Show with Jay Leno and Late Night with David Letterman. And nobody was sorrier to see David leave NBC than I was. And but that's what sometimes happened. They had needs at CBS that we didn't have, and there wasn't at that time a home in the house for two families. So we have to share. We are forced to share what we had. Not a happy moment, but that's sometimes the reality.
How about turning the tables? Have you talked to Connie Chung? And what?
Well, I think Connie's taken a different direction. I saw the announcement of their family the other day. Connie was with NBC before she was with CBS, and she did a lot of wonderful things for us. And I don't know exactly what her plans are, but she's been a part of the business a long time, and my guess is she will continue to be.
What are you doing to try to make Saturday Night Live funny again?
Well, for starts, we have the most successful, most established, most famous late-night television producer that there ever has been in Lorne Michaels. I think it's just a very difficult show. You think about for a minute Saturday Night Live, and you think about the audience. The show is probably designed more for people between the age of, say, 15 and 25. The reality of it is that there's an audience there that goes from 10 to 15, and there is an audience that starts at 25 and goes to about 40 that feels that they know the show very well because they watched it in the two other age groups. Then there's an audience that goes from about 40 to 50, early 50s, and they feel this is their show because they were there at the beginning. And they remember every one of the Belushi sketches and the Murray sketch and Aykroyd, and so they feel it's their show. And every one of those groups has a very distinct, very explicit view of what's funny and what isn't funny. So it is a challenging program assignment to put a show on and expect to get the applause on any given night of all of those groups. And I think that Lorne and NBC are struggling to. That's been done very successfully for a very long time, and I hope that we can continue to do that. But it's not easy.
I'm sorry to return to this issue, but it's come back at us again.
That's the same card.
No. If I understand you correctly, and this sums up several here, your previous statement, you say that television programming has less violence in it than in past years. Could you elaborate and justify that comment, please?
It's not exactly what I said. I said broadcast television programming, and certainly network television programming, NBC, has decidedly less violent character than it had in past years. By plan, by desire, by focus. I can make that same statement, I believe, for the other networks because I'm pretty familiar with that programming. When somebody uses the word or the phrase television programming, that's when the alarm bells go off. Because to different people, that has enormously different meaning. I mean, the reality of it is somebody can go into a hotel, turn on a show and see a lot of violence or a lot of material on there they're not happy with, and they walk out and they say, well, look what television is doing today. The reality is that could be a pay service. It could have been an R-rated movie that was in a pay-per-view window. It could have been part of a particular pay movie service, and it generally is when we track these things down. So I didn't say that television is meeting the nation's needs in terms of violence, but I did say that broadcast television, especially those that are involved with us, do. And on our cable side, I would say exactly the same thing. There is a difference. The reality is there is always going to be a difference when somebody is making a decision to pay for something as to how much regulation one can have and where it comes from. So I don't think you can just use the word television violence or television programming violence. You have to be very specific as to where it comes from and under what conditions it's received in the home.
Thank you. And now, before we get to our final questions, well, here's one. We'll give you this right away. Are Rush Limbaugh and other media bashers impacting, well, I don't like impacting, but you get the, on how you gather and report news? What effect does the whole phenomenon of talk shows have on the media?
Well, I guess I could go back a little bit. When I arrived at NBC in 1986, and my television experience was limited before that, although I was the president of Cox Cable in Atlanta and part of the Cox organization, which then and does have a major long-term investment in television. It was not surprising, but I was impressed as to how much effort goes in to try to present a balanced newscast. And I was also constantly impressed with how many people were unhappy with that. And I suppose that's the fair way it's always going to be. But the news organization NBC is under pressure daily from from groups, from individuals, from its own critiquing to make sure that everything we put on the air is balanced as best we can. I'm sure that every day that there are millions of people that don't feel that's the case about some personality, an interview, a particular dealing with an issue. But I can tell you without any reservation that that is an enormous focus of ours, and from everything I've seen, an enormous focus of the other network news organizations. The talk shows, in particular, do create a problem, that nothing we can do about it, because there are a number of people, maybe a growing number of people in the country who have trouble distinguishing between news that they seem to derive from talk shows or daytime talk shows or syndicated shows and what I'll call real news delivered by journalists who are quite conscious of the balance issues that I referred to. I think, on the other hand, our own surveys show most people do understand the difference, and most people see, a growing number of people see the talk shows as being more theater than spontaneous, and a situation that they enjoy the entertainment value of the show, and they don't really derive a lot of news value. But you know, Tim Russert is an example of somebody who has to go through that endless issue of balance, and we are not in the entertainment business. We're trying to make things attractive and present to people, but we are in the balance business, and there's a big effort every day, every program to continue to do that.
Thank you. And now, the presentation here. A certificate of appreciation for being with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that hasn't been downsized. It's a full size.
No.
It's a full size.
Yeah, you got the full size. That's right. And a full-size NPC coffee mug, which sells for $8 at the front desk. Its value is probably about $5. Okay? And finally, the last question. Sir, if you at NBC made $400 million in profits in 1 year, why? Oh, why? Can't you pay your interns a salary?
Interns are supposed to be learning. It's an educational experience. They're doing it for college credit. They shouldn't be paid to go to college. So.
Sorry, interns, I tried. Thank you all. Thank you all for being with us. It was the most enjoyable.
Thank you.
Luncheon. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Reg. That was nice. I'm glad you were. I hope it wasn't too long. It probably was too long.
No, it worked out fine.
Okay, you sure? Because it was.
Yeah.
I was trying to edit.